Under a frozen Berlin sky, February 1944, the shriek of Merlin engines tore through the clouds like steel ripping canvas. Below, German flak gunners craned upward, eyes narrowing as the contrails approached from the west. They expected lumbering B-17s, another routine wave of flying fortresses, to batter the capital. But what they saw that morning wasn't bombers. It was something faster, sleeker, silver streaks diving from the heavens with impossible precision. The air defenses hesitated. Then came the chatter of .50 caliber guns. In seconds, the hunters became the hunted. The aircraft was the North American P-51 Mustang, a machine the German aces had mocked only months earlier. Too slow, too fragile. American toys, they had said in ready rooms from Lille to Leipzig. Yet now, from the outskirts of Berlin to the ruins of Rostock, Luftwaffe squadrons found their top men falling from the sky, caught by an enemy fighter they once dismissed. Its long-range tanks carried death deeper into the Reich than any Allied aircraft before it, at 25,000 feet. Vapor trails twisted into knots. The smell of cordite and glycol-filled cockpits as P-51 pilots chased Me-109s across a sky split by cannon fire. Gun cameras rolled as tracer fire carved orange ribbons through the clouds. A German ace, flying his gleaming Focke-Wulf 190A, banked hard, confident his climb rate would shake the pursuer. But the Mustang stayed glued to his tail. The German pilot had seconds to realize what was happening. The American fighter was climbing with him, gaining even as his engine strained. A burst of fire, a flash of flame, and the sky claimed another veteran. This was not supposed to happen. The Luftwaffe had dominated European airspace since 1939. Its pilots were legends: Hartmann, Barkhorn, and Roll. Their victories numbered in the hundreds. To them, the air war was a chess game they had mastered. But in early 1944, the rules changed overnight. The Allies had introduced a weapon that shattered the balance: a long-range escort fighter capable of flying to Berlin, fighting there, and bringing its pilot home. Before the Mustang, bomber crews lived by grim statistics. Losses were expected: 10, sometimes 15% on a single raid. The B-17s and B-24s pushed deep into German territory, only to be torn apart by waves of Messerschmitts before reaching their targets. Escort fighters like the P-47 Thunderbolt and the Spitfire simply couldn't go the distance. They turned back over Belgium or the Netherlands, leaving the bombers alone in the most dangerous skies on Earth. When the Mustang entered the picture, everything changed. It wasn't just a new plane, it was a new kind of war. Allied planners had been desperate for a fighter that could escort bombers all the way to the heart of Germany. The solution came from a collaboration between British insight and American engineering. North American Aviation, under the leadership of James H. Kindleberger, delivered the prototype in just 117 days. Initially powered by an Allison engine, it performed well at low altitude but failed at high altitude, where the real battles were fought. The breakthrough came when British engineers fitted it with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the same beating heart that powered the Spitfire. The transformation was instant. The Mustang could now climb to 40,000 feet, match or exceed the Luftwaffe's best in speed and agility, and fly for more than 1,600 kilometers without refueling by late 1943. As the first Merlin-powered Mustangs reached Allied airfields in England, the Luftwaffe began noticing something disturbing. Their interception missions grew deadlier. German pilots reported American fighters appearing at unprecedented ranges, over Frankfurt, over Leipzig, and even near Berlin. It seemed impossible. Their intelligence had predicted months before that no escort fighter could reach the capital until at least mid-1944. Yet by January, the sky above the Reich was alive with silver wings and roaring Merlins. Inside the cockpit, the Mustang felt like freedom. The bubble canopy gave near-perfect visibility. Its sleek laminar flow wing reduced drag, allowing it to slice through the air like a razor. Pilots described it as a machine that seemed to read their thoughts. It went where you looked, one veteran recalled years later. German aces, who once sneered at American training, soon found themselves outnumbered, outflanked, and outfought. Even their superior experience couldn't compensate for exhaustion, dwindling fuel, and an enemy fighter that never seemed to run out of sky. the psychological shock was enormous. For years, German pilots had held the initiative. They attacked, dictated terms, and vanished into the clouds. Now, the hunters were being chased. Mustang formations swept ahead of the bombers, clearing the path before a single bomb was dropped. Luftwaffe bases were strafed at dawn, their aircraft burning before they ever took off. The myth of invincibility began to crumble. Berlin itself became a symbol of the turning tide. On March 4, 1944, for the first time, American bombers, escorted by P-51 Mustangs, reached the capital and returned home. For the Luftwaffe, it was unthinkable. Their intelligence reports read like obituaries. Entire squadrons wiped out, command networks collapsing. German ground crews began painting camouflage over runways. Desperate to hide from marauding Mustangs that struck even on their return flights in Allied command rooms. Reports came in daily, kill ratios climbing, bomber losses falling. Generals who once doubted the feasibility of daylight bombing now saw proof that air supremacy was within reach. Pilots, many barely 20 years old, returned from missions grinning, their gun barrels scorched, their oxygen masks smeared with sweat and frost. They had seen the impossible, flying over Berlin and living to tell about it. Still, for the German aces, denial ran deep. Some insisted the Mustang's success came from overwhelming numbers, not superiority. Others blamed fuel shortages or inexperienced replacements. But deep down, they knew the truth. The P-51 wasn't just another Allied fighter. It was a symbol of industrial precision, engineering genius, and strategic foresight. A machine that embodied the full weight of American industry and Allied cooperation as the sun set over the smoking ruins of Berlin. A single Mustang circled high above the city, its engine purring like a predator satisfied with the hunt. Below, airfields lay in ashes, flak towers were silent, and the once proud Luftwaffe grasped at ghosts. The Americans had built not just a plane but a bridge of steel and courage stretching from England to the heart of Hitler's empire. Yet one question remained, a question that haunted the Luftwaffe command. How had the Allies achieved this sudden leap in range, endurance, and precision? What secret gave the Mustang its terrifying reach? The answer would soon emerge from the factories of Detroit and the drafting tables of brilliant engineers, a quiet revolution of fuel, aerodynamics, and logistics that would change the course of the air war forever. The secret lay not in a single invention, but in a web of small, brilliant innovations, each piece fitting perfectly into a machine designed for dominance. Beneath the Mustang's sleek aluminum skin, engineers had rewritten the laws of long-range flight. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, built under license by Packard in Detroit, became its beating heart, a 27-liter V12 that could deliver over 1,600 horsepower at 25,000 feet. It burned high-octane fuel through a two-stage supercharger, maintaining power even where the air was thin and icy. To the Luftwaffe, it seemed like black magic, an American fighter that could chase them higher and faster than physics should allow. But range was the true miracle. The P-51's engineers had solved the riddle that had haunted Allied planners for years: how to protect bombers all the way to Berlin and back. The answer came in the form of new drop tanks, external fuel pods slung beneath each wing, lightweight but durable, holding over 150 gallons of aviation fuel. When empty, pilots jettisoned them, leaving the Mustang lean and agile for combat. This simple addition turned a short-range interceptor into a continental predator. Before, a fighter's radius barely reached the Rhine. Now, the Mustang could escort bombers to Berlin, fight over the target, and still return to England. Every detail was refined with purpose. The laminar flow wing, an aerodynamic breakthrough by North American's Edgar Schmid, reduced drag and increased efficiency. Instead of air braking chaotically over the surface, it flowed smoothly, allowing the aircraft to maintain higher speeds with less fuel. Even the cooling system was revolutionary, the Meredith effect duct. Designed by aerodynamicist Thomas K. Meredith, transformed engine heat into thrust, giving the Mustang a slight boost in speed rather than the usual penalty of drag. In combat, these invisible advantages meant everything. For the pilots of the 8th Air Force, these details were not abstract numbers. They were the difference between life and death. On March 6, 1944, as over 800 bombers roared toward Berlin, more than 100 P-51s took to the skies in escort. Among them flew the 357th Fighter Group, led by young, confident men like Clarence, Bud, Anderson, and Chuck Yeager, pilots who would become legends. They called themselves the Yoxford Boys. The Luftwaffe scrambled over 700 fighters to intercept, confident they would tear apart the unescorted bombers as before. But this time, the Mustangs were waiting. The German radar stations detected the formation too late. As the first wave of Bf-109s dove toward the bomber stream, silver flashes erupted from above and behind them. The Mustangs fell upon the attackers like hawks. Their guns, 6.50 caliber Brownings, fired in harmonized bursts that could shred a fighter in 2 seconds flat. German pilots who survived the first volleys were stunned by the range and accuracy of the fire. Those who tried to escape found no sanctuary. The Mustangs could climb with them, roll faster, and dive longer. The old tactics, hit and run, then vanish, no longer worked. The sky became a graveyard of aluminum and smoke. Over the next hour, more than 60 Luftwaffe fighters went down. The Americans lost 11. The bomber formations reached Berlin, dropped their loads, and turned home. It was the first full daylight bombing of the German capital, and it succeeded. For the men on the ground, watching contrails and fireballs above the clouds, it marked the moment the air war turned irrevocably against them. From that day forward, the Luftwaffe fought with desperation. They began throwing untested pilots into combat, barely trained boys flying outdated machines. Veteran aces, those who had once ruled the skies, were now being hunted one by one. Among them was Major Wilhelm Steinmann, a composite of several decorated German pilots. He had over 100 victories and a reputation for ice-cold precision. On April 8, 1944, over Hanover, Steinmann spotted what he thought was an isolated bomber straggler. He dove from the sun, closing in fast. But as he pressed his trigger, tracers sliced past his canopy. 2 Mustangs had appeared from nowhere. In seconds, his cockpit filled with smoke. His final radio transmission was a single word, unmöglich, impossible. That word summed up the reaction of the Luftwaffe command. Impossible, yet undeniable. Reports flooded in describing American fighters appearing hundreds of miles beyond their supposed range. Luftwaffe technicians dissected wrecked Mustangs, searching for hidden fuel bladders or experimental engines. None were found. The truth was far simpler and far more terrifying. The Allies had combined industrial capacity, engineering brilliance, and logistical coordination on a scale the Reich could never match. The Detroit plants that built Packard Merlins operated 24 hours a day. Each engine was identical, interchangeable, and meticulously tested. North American Aviation turned out Mustangs by the thousands, their assembly lines humming like clockwork. Fuel tank factories, radio manufacturers, gunsmiths, even tire makers, all synchronized in an industrial symphony. Every Mustang in the air represented not just a pilot, but an army of workers back home. The Germans, crippled by bombing and shortages, simply couldn't keep pace. Even the radios aboard the P-51 gave them an unseen edge. Using advanced VHF sets, Mustang pilots could coordinate across hundreds of miles, merging formations, calling reinforcements, and adjusting tactics in real time. Meanwhile, Luftwaffe units often fought in isolation, their communications jammed or limited by outdated HF frequencies. It was not just a battle of aircraft. It was a battle of networks, foresight, and adaptability. By May 1944, the Mustang had become more than a machine. It was a symbol of inevitability. The Luftwaffe's once feared aces were now targets, their confidence eroding with every mission. German engineers worked frantically on counters. The Me-262 jet fighter and the Ta-152 high-altitude interceptor. But the war had shifted too far, too fast. The factories building these advanced designs were already under Mustang attack. In one brutal week in June, P-51 squadrons destroyed over 500 German aircraft on the ground. The Luftwaffe's backbone was breaking, not from a single battle, but from relentless attrition. The Mustang's long legs meant there was no sanctuary, no airfield safe beyond reach. Allied dominance became absolute. Still, even amid triumph, the toll was staggering. Dozens of Mustang pilots were lost each month, their planes disappearing in smoke and flame over enemy territory. But the difference was in replacement. For every fallen American pilot, another stood ready. For every destroyed aircraft, three more rolled off the assembly line. And yet, beyond the mechanics of victory, something deeper was unfolding. The men flying those Mustangs were not simply soldiers. They were part of an industrial miracle. Young mechanics from Chicago, machinists from California, and engineers from Ohio all had contributed to the creation of this weapon. Together, they had crafted the perfect synthesis of man and machine. Courage and technology. By the summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe's elite fighter units, Jägerschwader 26, 27, and 54, were shadows of their former selves. Their kill counts, once proudly recorded, became grim reminders of what was lost. Every mission ended with fewer pilots returning. Every dawn brought more black smoke on the horizon. The P-51 Mustang had achieved what Allied generals once thought impossible: air supremacy over the heart of Nazi Germany. But the story was not over. Because as Allied pilots tightened the noose from above, the question remained: how would this supremacy reshape the war on the ground? The answer lay not in dogfights or air raids, but in what followed when the Mustangs cleared the skies and the bombers began to strike with unstoppable precision. The summer of 1944 marked a transformation not just in air superiority, but in the very rhythm of the war itself. With the P-51 Mustang sweeping the skies clean of German fighters, the Allies gained something far more valuable than empty airspace. They gained control of time. Every convoy that rolled, every bomber that flew, and every soldier that advanced on the ground did so under the shelter of that dominance. For the first time since 1939, the Luftwaffe could no longer dictate when or where battle would begin. The hunters had lost their wings. Factories that once churned out the machinery of Nazi power now lie exposed. The Mustangs paved the way for precision daylight bombing on a scale unimaginable only a year before. From Regensburg to Munich, from Stuttgart to Vienna, the airwaves crackled with a single message: the bombers are coming. But this time, they arrived escorted all the way to their targets and back again. Fuel plants, rail networks, aircraft hangars, nothing escaped. The Allies could finally strike at the Reich's arteries, and the Luftwaffe could do nothing to stop them. Psychologically, it was devastating. German civilians who once found comfort in hearing the growl of friendly fighters above now looked skyward in silence. Even Hitler's high command began to grasp the inevitable. Their ace pilots, the men who had once represented invincibility, were being erased one by one. The golden age of Luftwaffe supremacy, those years of effortless conquest and sky mastery, was gone. Pilots who had started the war as heroes now faced death daily, overwhelmed, underfueled, and surrounded by ghosts. For the Allies, the psychological transformation was just as profound. Bomber crews who had once climbed into their aircraft with trembling hands now felt the confidence of protection. They knew the Mustangs would be there, high above, weaving their silver shields through the clouds. Morale soared. The once frightening journey into Germany's heart became a calculated mission, not a suicide run. Airmen spoke of the Mustangs with reverence, calling them angels with engines. Yet this new dominance demanded sacrifice. Long-range missions tested every limit: fuel, stamina, nerves. Pilots endured frostbitten fingers and oxygen starvation, eyes straining for enemy specks that might never appear until it was too late. When they landed, the ground crews, those unsung engineers and mechanics, were waiting. They refueled, rearmed, patched bullet holes with aluminum sheets, and sent the aircraft back into the sky within hours. It was a rhythm of precision and exhaustion. Those ground crews embodied the hidden war of endurance. They were machinists, welders, and engineers, ordinary men and women whose skill turned machinery into miracles. Each time a Mustang took off, it carried their fingerprints. Factories in California, Ohio, and Michigan never slept. Production lines pulsed like arteries feeding a living machine. The numbers were staggering. Over 15,000 Mustangs built by war's end. Everyone represented an equation of material, design, and relentless will. The Luftwaffe tried to answer. They deployed the Me-262 jet fighter, a machine that could outrun and outclimb anything in the sky. But there were too few, too late. The jet's engines were fragile, fuel was scarce, and Allied fighters often caught them during takeoff or landing, strafing the runways before they could rise. Even innovation could no longer save Germany's air arm. It was suffocated by the very supremacy it had once enjoyed. Strategically, the effects were seismic. With the airspace clear, the Allies launched Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion of Normandy. It was no coincidence that the skies over France were nearly empty of German resistance that morning. The Mustangs had ensured it. Any Luftwaffe plane daring to approach the beaches was cut down before it could dive. The result was a massacre in reverse, the absence of opposition, a silence that signified Allied control. The success of that day was not just born on the beaches, but built in the factories, tested in the skies, and paid for in the blood of Mustang pilots who cleared the way to the Allies pushed deeper into Europe. Airfields followed, temporary strips carved from captured fields. Mustangs landed where German aircraft had once stood, their propellers still spinning through dust and debris. For the Luftwaffe, retreat was endless. Supply lines crumbled, morale disintegrated, and even training schools were bombed into silence. By early 1945, their once feared force was reduced to a handful of veteran survivors and a swarm of desperate novices. When the Allies finally crossed the Rhine, the Mustang remained above them, circling, watching, and guarding. Its sound, once alien to German ears, had become the anthem of Allied victory. Villagers across occupied Europe learned to distinguish it instantly, that deep, rhythmic hum of the Merlin engine echoing over the fields. To them, it meant hope, liberation, a symbol that the war's end was near. For the men who flew it, the P-51 was more than metal and horsepower. It was an extension of themselves, a companion that carried them through fire and fear. Many never returned. Their names are etched into plaques and airbase memorials across Europe, reminders that behind every victory lay sacrifice measured not in machines, but in men. When the war finally ended in May 1945, and the smoke cleared from Europe's shattered cities, the Mustang stood as both weapon and witness. It had escorted the bombers that broke the Reich's industry, covered the paratroopers who liberated France, and humbled the aces who once ruled the air. In that triumph, it also closed a chapter in aviation itself. The age of the piston engine was ending, and the jetage was beginning. But for a brief, glorious moment, the P-51 Mustang represented the pinnacle of what courage and engineering could achieve together. Its legacy endured. Decades later, in the jet-dominated skies of Korea, the Mustang would fly again, slower now, older, but still deadly, still graceful. Modern pilots called it a legend, a relic of when man and machine shared an almost spiritual bond. Engineers studied its wing design for generations. Military strategists studied its doctrine, how range and communication could outweigh brute strength. The Mustang's lesson outlived the war itself, that innovation, unity, and relentless adaptation could conquer even the most entrenched power. It wasn't merely about speed or firepower. It was about the unseen network of ideas, factories, and minds that made such speed possible. It was proof that wars are won not only by the courage of those who fight, but also by the genius of those who build. As the last rays of the European sun fell over the ruins of Berlin, a lone Mustang circled once more, its shadow passing over the city that had once defied the world. The pilot looked down at the smoking rubble, then turned west, disappearing into the fading light. The growl of his engine echoed across the horizon, a sound that had once been feared but was now remembered as the sound of freedom in modern war. The Mustang story remains a timeless truth. Technology without will is useless, and courage without innovation is doomed. Together, they form the unstoppable force that shapes history, the union of human resolve and mechanical perfection that once flew over Berlin and never looked back.